Thank you. In the videos that are playing throughout the day, Americans are clear about their concerns: wages, bills, jobs, and the other issues that have a direct and immediate bearing on their lives. Often the missing element in much of the discussion over debt and deficits is how Americans' lives are affected by the fiscal choices that our leaders make. It's critical that we include the American public in this important national dialogue. To help clarify the connection between fiscal issues and economic growth, we have a very distinguished panel. Senator Alan Simpson is, well, Senator Alan Simpson. Everyone knows the passion and the humor that he brings to this issue. As co-chair of the Fiscal Commission, Alan Simpson painted a clear picture for Americans of the consequences of our fiscal decisions. He's been traveling around the country talking with people about how this issue affects their lives. Michael Nutter was elected mayor of Philadelphia in 2007. He has confronted the many challenges of a big city mayor: attracting business investment, providing critical services, and investing in the future through education. Mayor Nutter can provide perspective on how the federal government's fiscal decisions have an impact at all other levels of government and how that translates into people's lives at the local level. Jay Fishman is Chairman and CEO of the Travelers Companies, and he has become a vocal advocate for fiscal responsibility. As the leader of companies providing financial products to American families and businesses, Jay can provide his perspective on how America's fiscal condition affects personal budgets and businesses across the nation. The panel will be moderated by my good friend George Stephanopoulos, host of ABC's Good Morning America and This Week, and ABC's chief political correspondent. With his extensive experience in both journalism and policy, George is well qualified to help navigate this discussion. Please welcome our panelists.
Hi, everyone. We're going to take our seats now.
You're right here, George.
All right. And I'm glad you're right next to me. It's the first time I've ever been to the right of you, I think, Senator Simpson. But let me...
I didn't hear that.
First time I've been to the right of you.
Oh, I heard that.
But I do want to begin with you because I haven't been here for the entire morning, but I heard the last couple of speakers, and I've been interviewing a lot of people on the budget issues on This Week and Good Morning America over the last year. And it made me think you must feel a little bit like the Pope these days. Everyone feels the need to kiss the ring of Simpson Bowles.
Yeah, we'll kiss something.
Even
go ahead.
Even if they don't adhere to everything you laid out. But what I'd like to do is have you talk a little bit about what you're hearing when you go out in the country and try to lay the groundwork for support, what you're hearing back from people of what they expect, what they want, what they need, and what they understand about the problem.
First, thanks to Pete Peterson and Michael for this. This is a great forum, and I'm always proud to show up. I knew Pete years and years ago when he was talking about Social Security reform, wrote a book, wonderful, dear man, very dear person in my life. Erskine Bowles is one of the finest human beings I've ever worked with. He's just superb. He's the numbers guy. He calls himself the numbers guy. I do the color. But let me tell you what we found. Erskine and I will often say to a group, and might say it just this way, pull up a chair, we don't do BS or mush. And people are thirsting for that. And you then don't give them BS and mush. And when somebody gets up on their hind legs running for office, says, well, I'm here to tell you we're going to save everything, and we're going to save precious Medicare and precious Medicaid and precious Social Security and precious defense without touching those people are fake. They're phony. You can't get there unless you're messing with the big four. And the biggest of the big four is Medicare. And there's no need to go any further and blame it on Obamacare, call it Elvis Presley care, I don't care. It can't possibly work under any scenario if you use your brain. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, it's going to take care of pre-existing conditions for somebody 3 years old who lived to be 60. One person in the United States weighs more than the other two. You got obesity, you got diabetes A and B. Got people who choose to do booze and cigarettes and tobacco and designer drugs. And a new disease is discovered every month. Who the hell do you think And then a guy who could buy this building gets a heart operation for $200,000, doesn't even get a bill. What the hell is that? I mean, use your head. And 10,000 a day turning 65. Now people hear that, and then another final one is this, and then you can fire away. That if anybody believes we're hollowing out the defense budget, the only thing hollow is their brain. Because here's the statistic. We spend $750 billion a year on defense, and the top 14 countries on earth, including China and Russia, combined spend $540 billion. Run it through your head again. $750 billion for us, $550 billion for the biggest 14 countries on the earth, including Russia and China, and you're hollowing out the defense budget? The drinks are on me. This is where we are. How many contractors do you have in the Defense Department? Well, it's quite a range. Well, what is it? Well, it's between 1 million and 10 million. That is a hell of a range. and that's where we are. Social Security now will go broke 3 years faster as of the report last week. And we haven't heard a peep out of the AARP. I mean, these guys are monsters. I said, are there patriots in here or just marketers? Well, they were really quite irritated. And anyway, that's it. You can't get there.
Okay, that's your case. So the question is, what do you hear back? I can imagine you saying, well, we all know that Medicare is going to be a problem in the future. The costs are going to continue to grow, but don't take away what I have now. We all know that defense spending far exceeds what the rest of the world spends, but don't leave us in the least bit vulnerable. When you get pushback, what do you do? And what are the 2 or 3 numbers, figures, arguments that seem to make people understand everyone's going to have to contribute to this?
Well, the escape hatch is I'm ready to do something as long as everybody else will. That's the escape hatch, because they know nobody else is going to do that. And that's their way out. It's done with smiles and graciousness, you know. I'm ready. Yeah, they're not ready for any of that stuff. And you got the realtors, be in the housing in America. Well, what's $1 million mortgage, interest deduction? Set it at $500,000 and then give a 12.5% non-refundable tax credit, what helps the little guy. But I tell you, George, what people really understand is that when everybody's talking about this and they'll say, I'm ready to do something, the hypocrisy and the idiocy of those who say, I don't want to hurt the little guy. Well, let me tell you, when the tipping point comes, and it won't come from Democrats or Republicans or anybody you know, it'll come from people who loan us money. And the market will respond and they'll say, we want more money for our money. And at that point, inflation will kick in and interest rates will kick in, and the guy that gets hurt the most is the little guy.
Let me bring that to Mr. Fishman, because as the chairman of Travelers, I guess you're deep in the bond market every day. And I know this is an imprecise science, but how much time, and everybody's been waiting for this, how much time are the bond markets going to give our federal government to address this?
Mm-hmm. I suspect less than most people think. You asked the question, what are the couple of numbers that get people's attention? We've put out a couple. Total federal revenues last year from all sources, $2.3 trillion. Total spending, $3.6. So we spent $1.3 on $2.3 more. In 2020, Congressional Budget Office data, Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, simply based on demographics, will be $1 trillion a year more than it is now. It's going to grow from about $1.6 trillion last year. These are round numbers. You round trillions, so you spend a lot of time doing commas and points. In 2020, $2.7 trillion. That's stunning to me. And I suspect that the time that we have to deal with this is shorter than most people would observe. The principal beneficiary, by the way, or there's certainly a principal beneficiary of low interest rates, has been the U.S. government. Another amazing statistic. $15 trillion of debt, $12 trillion held by the public, $225 billion of interest cost a year right now. That's the same number it was when we had $5 trillion outstanding. because rates are down so low. You put the rates in today that they were when debt was $5 trillion, add $500 billion to the deficit that we sit on today. So simple stuff. I get confused when people talk about debt as a percentage of GDP. I don't, but tell me that we've got, in essence, a fixed cost of $1 trillion a year coming at us in 7.5 years, and we're going to march our way to it. That just scares the devil out of me.
And how is it affecting the decision-making of you and your peers at the top of corporate America?
The reason we got started in this, because we got a company to run, is that we started asking ourselves 3-4 years ago, how are we going to plan for the next 10? And I think that's what good business people do. So we sat down and we said, what's the outlook? And the best we could get to was that if we didn't do anything, it'd be awful. And if we actually acted, it'd be difficult for a few years, but it'd get better. And I think, and I do speak to other CEOs, until there's some clarity, and by the way, I don't think that there's any one solution. I think there's 50 solutions to this. The only one that doesn't work is the one we're doing now, which is nothing. Until there was some clarity, most business people are hunkered down. We're trying to figure out how to run our businesses so in a sluggish growth environment, I don't know the difference between +1 and -1, by the way, but in that kind of low growth environment, how does your business do as well as it can do?
And that means cutting costs as close as you can to the bone.
That's right. Doing more with less. How do you not put more people to work and manage until the economic outlook in the intermediate term? Look, I recognize the fiscal cliff in January 1, but that isn't how you run a business. You run a business looking out over the intermediate term. And when you look at that right now, until you see some action and a plan to make it better, it just looks
Well, there has been a plan. The Simpson Bowls is one plan. I want to get to Mayor Nutter in a second, but let me just ask one more question to you on this. I've actually heard the president express his frustration about Simpson Bowls, especially about the way, frankly, the financial and the corporate community has reacted to it. They all press him, he believes, to endorse Simpson Bowls, yet when it comes to the tax increases called for, particularly those on the business side, business runs away.
Yeah, I'll only speak for myself. We're in. We'd sign up. I mean, it's just as a matter of public policy, economic outlook, we'd sign up for that in its totality in a heartbeat. The challenge becomes...
Completely, across the board.
Because when you start breaking it into pieces, you can't put it back together again. Right. This is really a matter about priorities and choices. We can do we're the richest country on the planet. We can do any 100 things we want. The only thing we can't do is everything. And that's kind of where we are at the moment. So you get a bipartisan group to sit down, wrestle through the issues, fight the good fights, come up with something that works. How can you not, as someone interested in the long term, how can you not sign up for it in a heartbeat? No
Mayor, that brings me to you, because if you ask me, from listening to a lot of people, what's the one word that almost everyone can sign on to, would be balance. The idea that everyone is going to have a share and a stake in this. Can you sell that at the local level?
Sold it, and people bought it because it was real. I was honest. In September of 2008, before we really knew what was going on, I announced to the public that we had at a minimum of $450 million 5-year plan deficit. Much like Jay, we actually plan for the future. We have a 5-year plan. We have a financial oversight entity. The next month, in October, I told them that it had grown to about 650 to 850. And 2 days after President Obama was elected, 2 days later, that Thursday, I stood up to the Philadelphia public and said, we have a $1 billion 5-year plan deficit, and here's what we're going to do to solve it. And I used the words, this is a shared sacrifice approach. Everyone has to put something on the table. We stopped our business tax reduction program that we had had for 13 straight years, started under Mayor Rendell. Suspended it. Cut a variety of services, looked at every possible thing that we were doing. Cut back. We did not lay off thousands of people because I didn't want to damage our ability to provide core services. But there are a bunch of things that we were doing that we said we can't do these things anymore. And we did temporarily raise taxes as well. We closed, ultimately, a $2.4 billion gap. We closed the first billion in November, December, and in January I announced that we had another $1.5 billion 5-year plan deficit. So we had to cover $2.5 billion over about a 5.5-year plan period of time. And it was 50% cuts, and it was 50% new revenues. And no one was happy. But everyone knew that every person in the city had given up something. My first announcement was I cut my pay 10% and my chief of staff, and have never restored it. And every senior executive in the city government took pay cuts and furloughs because we had to let the public know that we were not going to ask anyone to do anything that we weren't prepared to do
Could you
first.
tell how much that symbolism mattered because,
Sure.
and do you think it's a model?
I don't.
Because it's not a lot of money.
I don't make a whole lot of money, but it is what it is. But I'll tell you exactly what happened. We brilliantly decided to then have 8 town hall meetings shortly after we made all these announcements. The swimming pool's not going to open, and some of our library hours cut back. I mean, all kinds of stuff. It was my idea, not one of my best moments. So we go to these meetings, 8 town hall meetings, 500 plus people, 3 hours of folks screaming at us all night long about just about how stupid we were, that we're dealing with this. And the guy gets up and says, you know, you got all these people here, blah, blah, blah. You need to cut your salary. I said, I did that. You need to cut their salaries. I did that. Now sit your butt down. Never heard from him for the rest of the night. I mean, people understood that my little 10% pay cut was not solving the fiscal crisis, but they understood that the mayor stood up and cut his pay as a part of a plan that was going to close a hole, and that we were serious about this. Because no one stands up and does stuff like that.
You just made me think of something else.
I did that once when I was getting shelled on every side. I cut back my pay and I gave back $93,000, and it may be symbolism, but it saved me a lot of pain. And boy, they understand that. They don't, you know, taxing the rich and all this stuff, they don't get that. That wouldn't raise you enough for the last 6 months, but they understand that right there, that you did it to yourself. Right. Well, where do you get your health care? Is it free? You know, and you fly on the government? I said, where the hell do you get that? Reading the Reader's Digest, I guess. Anyway, you tell them that, and they're with you. I did that.
They understood.
Oh, I love that. I didn't know that.
And this is something you can do at the local level, a little bit harder for the Congress or the Senate, at least in Washington. You could have these venting sessions where everyone could at least blow off some steam.
Look, George, I walk out of the house, I walk out of the office. I mean, you know, my constituents are there. We have a very close personal relationship. I pick up their trash, I fill potholes, I put police officers on the street, we run rec centers. You call 911, you expect in the local government someone's going to show up. So, I mean, we don't have to do a whole lot of polling. I have a daily poll. I've got thousands of people I run into on a daily basis. They tell me what's going on, how they feel. The Philadelphians are not shy. But, you know, it's so, I mean, with every respect, and we're here in Washington, but, I mean, I think that, you know, many members of Congress are very much out of touch with what's really going on back home. They live in a very closed circle environment here, and this is all about point scoring and who's up, who's down, who's going to, you know, cut the next ad, who got the soundbite, who's going to be on the 6 o'clock news, who's going to be on CNN, who's going to be on MSNBC. Mayors don't have time for that. I can't debate whether or not I'm plowing snow. You either did it or you didn't. I mean, this is a daily test that we go through. Our budget is balanced. Theirs is not. I can't spend more than I have. I have a capital budget. They don't. The federal government does not have a capital budget. They just wait for stuff to break, and then they send somebody to fix it. In March of 2008, I-95 was shut down in Philadelphia for 3 days. Because a PennDOT bridge inspector happened to go to a store to get a cheesesteak, happened to look up and saw a gaping hole in I-95 over his head. Traffic was backed up from Baltimore to New York as a result. There is no capital program in the federal government. How can you run a government with no capital program and no idea going into the future of how you're going to spend and plan? I mean, this is just not the way to run this railroad here.
Senator Simpson, there aren't that many recent examples of where Republicans and Democrats have come together in Washington to make more difficult choices. You had Democrats and Republicans come together in 2001 to pass tax cuts. The last time I could see on a big deficit reduction plan was probably under the first President Bush in 1990, and both parties seem to have learned from that. Don't go down that road again.
Yeah, but that road got all twisted because they went to Andrews Air Base and put together a deal and said, here's what we can do. We can get budget reform, we get 2-year budgeting, we can deal with catastrophic health care. There was a lot of stuff. The minute she was out there, The House members, Michael, I don't remember who all was there, but they were all Republicans. And they made the deal, and they said, we need revenue. And so they went to George I and said, you won't believe what we're asking, but if we can do this package, we need revenue, and you'll have to help. He said, well, that's great because of my pledge. Read my lips. This is really fun that you could come and tell me this. And they said, but we can do it for you. And Dole promised that, and so did Newt. And so Dole came back to us, and in a bipartisan vote of 66 to 33 or something like that, we bought the package. And Newt had voted for it out at Andrews Air Base, and he came back and went on the floor of the House, it's in living color, and said, as a member of the group out there, I voted for this, but as a member now individual, I'm voting against it, and I hope my Republican colleagues will help. And along came Newt and Army and DeLay, and I don't know how many, 40, 50, 60. The Democrats were thrilled. It was the end of George Bush and the beginning of Newt. And that's how you can really get...
We're seeing a similar dynamic play out today. So I guess what I'm trying... You all in your commission were able to get buy-in from Democrats and Republicans. It had limited success, very limited success in the Senate and the House. How do you build a bipartisan coalition in this Congress?
You do it with trust. And there's no such thing as trust. Trust is the coin of the realm in a legislative body. That's all I ever did. I didn't want to be, anybody. I wanted to legislate. I knew how to do it. Knew how to amend bills. Knew how to construct them. Knew how to go to conference. Knew how to floor debate. I knew that. And there is no trust now. The coin of the realm is trust, and there's no trust even among party members. Look what's happening now within where one of the leaders of the House sponsored or helped some guy in a primary to knock off another guy that was sitting next to him. I mean, what does that
And then
breed?
at the same time, on the issue of trust, there's probably even less trust from everyone out there in the country, what they feel about Washington. They can't trust Washington right now to solve their problems.
But George, I would only add on to the senators. I mean, if we're going to do a one-word thing, I think the next word is courage. I mean, you just have to have the courage to do the right thing. I mean, it appears, some in our profession worry so much about keeping their job and whatever's going on in their heads that they are blind to the 15 million plus folks who don't have one. And they're so worried that, well, if I do this and then this calculation and then I have to raise more money, or this group is going to line up against me, the country is calling on you for your service. Have some courage, do what's right, and the rest will really kind of take care of itself. And if this is the only thing that you can do, that's really kind of a personal problem.
But is that broad middle that may want compromise? Are they speaking out? Are they mobilized? Are they energized?
I think every survey has shown that Democrats, Republicans, Independent, Tea Party, Libertarian, whatever you want to be, everyone is calling for compromise. Unfortunately, 500 some folks here, I think, are not really listening because they're talking amongst themselves in a room, and this is our thing, and we've got a position, and we've got to maintain it. And so, the country is calling for compromise. No one can support total gridlock. I've never polled gridlock, but I don't know what the constituency is for gridlock. So you do it, and people hear it, and you make your pitch, or you use the word, can that be sold? And you take action and move on, to the next thing. I think that, for me, that's what this business is about. I'm a public servant. This is what I do.
I'm actually reminded, and I recognize it's different because he was appointed, not elected, but I'm reminded of Paul Volcker in the late 1970s. We'd had 10 plus years of corrosive inflation. You went to take out a mortgage on a house, 14, 15, 16% was pretty common. And I think he understood that the only thing worse than fixing inflation was not fixing it. And in a course of 10 days, he took the prime rate up to 20%, how short our memories are. And it really triggered the recession of '82, the last time we had unemployment over 10%. And It certainly had an impact on the Rust Belt, the sort of center of the country. Companies that were dependent on leverage and debt and borrowing costs spiked. But it created a foundation shortly thereafter for a remarkable recovery and 30 years of really sustained economic growth. And I look at that moment as probably as good an example of shared sacrifice as I can think of, at least in my lifetime, when everybody was impacted by it. You tried to buy a house, it was hard. The only people who actually at that point benefited were those who actually had some money and could invest it and get a decent return. All the rest of us were struggling during all that. But there's no easy answer here. And it's going to take a group of people. That was different because he was appointed, not elected. But it's going to take a group of people who have a real sense of their responsibility and their role and lead.
So if you were at a town meeting of a member of Congress trying to sell a plan like this in, say, 6 months down the road, and they say, fine, that's easy for you to say. You're chairman of Travelers Insurance. I'm sure you have a comfortable living. What are you prepared to sacrifice?
Yeah, whatever I'm asked of. I'm dead serious about this. I mean, they've done the tough work already. We talk about, can you sit down and do bipartisan work and bang out a solution that everyone has to hold their nose to, but in the end, is a pretty good framework for moving forward. I mean, they've done all the heavy lifting. So whatever they ask of me, my own personal story, why am I here? My father came out of service, started a tiny printing business. It always was a tiny printing business, but it enabled me to be the first person in my family to be able to go to college. And here I sit. So how do you not feel some obligation to be involved and do whatever is asked? I certainly feel that way. So whatever it is, whatever the compromise is that moves us off where we are, you got to step up and do your part, I think.
And Senator Simpson, we are approaching a pretty remarkable moment that we've talked about a lot today. At the end of this year, unlike anyone I think that I know in my adult lifetime, where so many decisions have to be made in such a concentrated period of time. You have a limited amount of time in order to bring everybody together, and you're almost certain, you will be doing it right after an election when feelings are most raw. So looking at it from both sides, both from the position you have right now, but also from your former position as a senator, how would you recommend the Congress deal with that right after the election? To put it off, to just bite the bullet if you can in the lame duck session in the first month or two of the new term?
I think it's going to be, between November 6th and December 31st, it's going to be chaos in Congress. Absolute chaos. You're going to find guys who are defeated, new ones waiting to come in, and you have a flood of, as Bernanke says, a fiscal cliff of, if you extend the Bush tax situation, that's $3.8 trillion over 10 years, and then you're going to have to take the payroll tax back to 6.2 from 4.2. I haven't heard the AARP talk about the sacredness of the payroll tax while they watched it go down from 6.2 to 4.2. Love to hear that story. And I suppose when they raise it to 6.2, Grover will call that a tax increase. And then you've got the sequester coming in, and let me tell you, there'll be hair and blood and eyeballs all over the floor. And they will do something. They will do something. They may do a 6 months extension. You can bet that's the closest thing that will come. And then the new president, or the old president, whoever is elected, is going to come in January and say, I never knew these figures were this bad. I'm so shocked that this country is in this unsustainable, totally predictable situation of debt, deficit, and interest, which matches anything in Portugal, Spain, Ireland, or Italy. And Italy only owes $2.6 trillion. We owe $16 trillion. And what the hell is a trillion? Nobody knows. So a trillion, if you spend $1 a second for right now, you'd hit a trillion at 32,500 years. If you spend $1 million since the birth of Christ, $1 million a day, you wouldn't be at a trillion yet. And better yet, the Big Bang Theory of the universe was 13,600 billion years ago, and that ain't even close to a trillion. That's where we are. For God's sake, and you just like rock for brains.
But we're also at 8% unemployment,
yeah,
sluggish growth. So can you sign on to what President Clinton has talked about, the framework of Simpson Bowles, but don't implement until you've got some growth back?
Bill Clinton has been the greatest ally for us. I know he went to the president, and Erskine and I have visited with President Obama. I know he went to him and said, for God's sake, you did this by executive order, and you got 11 of the 18 to vote for it. That's 60%. Hell, as Erskine said, Clinton would have said, I'd wrap my arms around that thing and take it. And he would have. And he's told the president that.
And so, but would you take now, you're saying delaying the cuts, delaying the cutbacks until the economy is growing again?
We put in our proposal. I always say to people that when everything fails, read the 67-page report. And it uses a word of shared sacrifice. You didn't hear anybody talking about that all day. And it uses words like going broke. And so it's not a mystery to Americans, but you can't get there with just fluffing it. What the hell was your question? Yes, I want to be sure I answered that, George. What was it again?
No, I think
George, speak out there.
I think you did, but let me bring this to Mayor to Mayor Nutter. What did you find you couldn't address, you couldn't cut, people just would absolutely say, no way, no how, we're not going to do it?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that every department and agency in the government had to take a cut. I mean, I had to cut police services. I did not lay off a police officer, didn't lay off a firefighter, didn't lay off a sanitation worker, didn't lay off a health worker. But we reduced the size of the government by 1,600 people. We cut back overtime in the police department by 30%. Crime kept coming down. And unfortunately, we lose 15 to 18 officers a month, and we were not able to hire as many as I wanted. Had not been able to put in a fire class in recent times. So we've kept fire deaths at historic lows. So a part of it was really more about what we were not going to do while maintaining the core services. I mean, I don't know when the recession is going to be over, or I mean, technically it is over, but it's after effects. I do believe, though, this is not going to last forever, and I had to be prepared for growth going forward. But people would not stand for massive cuts, certainly in public safety. They were not going to stand for massive cuts in programs that affect children or seniors, our most vulnerable populations. But, where we could cut administratively, where we could become more efficient, where we could get rid of some services. I mean, every service we provide has a constituency. And that's why we got, 3 hours of shouting and screaming for all the stuff that we were going to do. But, there are some things that are essential, and then there are just some things that are good to have. We kept the essentials and cut back on the good to have stuff. And I would only say to you, George, that, I'm presently vice president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and slated to be president next month. I mean, if you want to see leadership in action, Democrats and Republicans, because more than half of my colleagues, I have no idea what party they're in, because, there is, I think it was Mayor LaGuardia said, there's no Democrat or Republican way of sweeping a street. We do what we do. And so that's where you're seeing great leadership and innovation on the ground, all back at home, that mayors are providing, again, because we have to. There was a guy on the video as we were standing over to the side, which is what I say back home. We have to get things done. And you get things done by making tough decisions. Every mayor's got constituencies that are upset about whatever it is that they're upset about. And, some will go through their election cycle, and some will win and some will lose. But they are trying to do the right thing to run their cities.
So where do you think, as a Democrat, where do you think your own party has fallen short here in Washington?
Well, it didn't help that we didn't hold on to the House. Kind of put a little... cramp the style a little bit. I think that forcing more and more votes to take place. I'm not all caught up in the intricacies of Washington. I think that the Senate, certainly where there is the majority, it's not for me to give the Senate leader advice, but I think you have to keep pushing. You have to keep pushing. You have to keep fighting. And if folks don't want to take action, make them vote. I was a legislator. I spent 14 and a half years in city council. Again, it was not a particularly D&R, kind of thing, at the local level. But I think putting these ideas out and staying unified. You can say whatever you want to say about the Republican Party, and yes, I'm a Democrat and I'm partisan at least 2 days a year. But, right, wrong, or indifferent, they seem to stick together. I think certainly it would be more helpful and beneficial to the president if the Democrats would really line up. And this is the agenda. This is what we're trying to get done. These are the reasons why. And be bold in their actions.
And Mr. Fishman, I wonder if you can address one of the things we also know is as difficult as these debt and deficit problems are, and you hear it across, around the world. If we fail to make the investments we need to make in education, if we fail to make sure that our infrastructure is world class, is on a par with China, is on a par with the rest of the world, we're not going to be able to have the kind of growth we need in the future, and that in the end, growth will also be the biggest driver of reducing our deficit. Can you sell that idea across the business community?
Well, business people are usually pretty good at talking about priorities, making choices. We actually live in a world of limited resources and infinite demand. So most business people get the notion of you can't do everything and you got to pick your spots. I don't think that debate. I don't think we've had a rich discussion of priorities and choices. We've been trying these last 10 years to do everything simultaneously, and you're right. It's all important. Everything is important. I loved your numbers on the Defense Department. Thank you. I'm going to use that one prospectively. But it falls into choices and priorities. Yeah, I think the business community gets it. Honestly, I think they get it more than most people give us credit for. The other piece of this, I think, that's so important is insurance business. You don't know what you don't know. One of the biggest buyers of Treasury securities has been the Japanese for the last period of time. Well, they had a tsunami. Their energy industry is upside down. They've had to shut down all of their nuclear plants in Japan. It wouldn't be an unreasonable decision for them to make, to take those dollars that would otherwise have been directed to financial investment and put it into infrastructure investment along the lines that you were just describing, their priorities. Does that put more pressure on the Treasury market over the next 5 to 10 years? I don't know, but I began to recognize that there's a geopolitical element of this that we don't control. We can get very wrapped up in the debate about the dollars that we spend, but someone's got to lend them to us. Gets back to your question earlier, how much time do we have? What we don't know are the geopolitical factors that could turn that all upside down quickly.
Could be happening in Greece in the next 4 weeks.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And you can see that in lots of places around the world. And so far we've had good leadership. We've made sound decisions. And this is difficult. And the longer we wait, the more painful it will be. I'm certain of that. I mean, it's just arithmetic. It's not even complicated. It's just arithmetic. The longer we wait, the more difficult the consequences to get us right will be. But there is a factor of what we don't control, and I worry about that a lot. I really do.
And Judy Woodruff brought this up with Paul Ryan earlier, Senator. What would you say to Richard Murdoch, the Republican who just won the primary against Dick Lugar in Indiana, who says, one side just has to win here. It's not the time for compromise.
I was shocked, and Lugar is a very dear friend of mine. He was always helpful to me in my leadership and to Dole. And we counted on him because he was such a remarkable, brilliant centrist. And I believe this gentleman that won said that we have to step up the partisanship, and that's his pitch. I would cite the case for him of Paul Wellstone, who came to the U.S. Senate when I was there to stick it in Jesse Helms, I believe was his earthy phrase. And he got to know Jesse, and after a year, Jesse and Wellstone were sponsoring legislation together. There's some softening agents in there, but they're not like they were before. The softening agents in the Senate are not there. The sharp-edged people are there. And then you have a couple of leaders, you've got Harry and Mitch, and they're both a couple of prize fighters, and they love the ring, and they're good at it, and they know how to hold their troops. You can tell one of your members if you mess around too much with the other guy, they're going to make you the chairman of the journal committee. Or the ranking member.
You don't sound all that optimistic. Do you think that these issues can be addressed and solved, particularly in the U.S. Senate these days with the rules as they are right now?
that things can be solved with the rules the way they are now?
Yeah, right now, basically it takes 60 votes to get anything done.
Well, the hold is Dole and I finally just said we're not going to go for that. We didn't have to have a written rule. We just said, who's got a hold on this piece of legislation? And the Secretary of the Senate would say so-and-so, and we'd go to him and say, get that thing off of there. Well, at first I've got to have this. Well, we say, well, we can't give you that. We'll give you that in 6 months, so you get a chance at that. But get that thing off of here. We have legislation. We're here to legislate. Nowadays, they're here to do fundraisers. We would have nights where we couldn't get a quorum because they were raising money in Detroit or L.A. And now it's 10 times worse. But you have to have a discipline, and you have to say, look, you got to use a little courage. They don't want a hot vote. But the filibuster, don't mess with that, because that's an automatic fanny kicking machine. It's going to kick your opponent in the fanny sometimes. You're going to love it. And then it's going to kick you in the fanny sometime, and you're not going to love it. But it has a rule. But there's a way to break that easily. And it's just 3 words. Bring your cot. In other words, don't listen to the threat of a filibuster. Just say, we're setting up cots in the cloakrooms, and we're going to filibuster, and we're going to have round the clock. Bring your cot. That would shape up a lot of guys.
Mayor Nutter, you talked about the importance of making sure that everyone took a cut, that you took cuts as well. But flip the question around. I would think one of the advantages when it works on the local level is that people actually can make the direct connection between the sacrifice they're making, the tax they are paying, the cutback they've had to endure, and the benefit they're seeing. What were the benefits that people saw sort of immediately, or at least over a reasonable period of time?
I think the first was, and this is maybe a little less tangible, one, they saw that we actually had a plan. And some parts they might actually agree with, and some parts they hate it. But it was constant communication with the public on a regular basis. This is why we're doing this. This is what this is about. We talked about shared sacrifice 1 million times a day to help people understand that this was fair. You might not like it, but it's fair. And everyone is doing their part. We talked about the fact that we would not compromise on public safety, that we were still committed, of course, to education, that we were still focused on, even in the midst, as the recession was worsening, that we were constantly out trying to get jobs and provide economic opportunity, that we were running the government with integrity. There have been some challenges with that in previous administrations, but it was a constant barrage of information. We did do 8 town hall meetings. I mean, I jokingly said it was a dumb idea. Well, it may not have been the brightest, but we were out there on a regular basis. And so, because our basic philosophy was, you have a right to be upset, you have a right to hear from us. It brought the entire administration out, all the top level folks, and you have a right to let us know what's on your mind, and we're going to tell you why we're doing what we're doing. And I think when that exercise was over and the next budget came, and quite frankly, things continued to worsen, but we were steadfast in what we were trying to accomplish. I mean, I think people got the message that they're not just throwing everything up on the wall and to see what sticks. Here's the plan. This is what we're trying to accomplish. And we communicated that, public safety was not being compromised, that we were focused on our police officers, our firefighters, our correction officers, EMS workers, and the like, the things that people truly cared about. I announced that, we have 70 swimming pools in Philadelphia. When I made that big announcement, I said we were only going to be able to have 10 of them open. Now, this was in November, so, I had a little bit of lead time, right? Everybody's upset. Oh, my God, swimming pools. I said, it's November. Calm down. We struck up a public-private partnership. We ended up having 46 of those pools open, and every summer since, all 70 have been open. Ed Snyder Youth Hockey Foundation stepped up. We have 5 ice rinks. I said, we're only going to be able to keep 2 open. They stepped up immediately and said, we'll run the other 3 for you. This is a time when you also have to show that you're out there, you're hustling, you're working, you're driving an agenda, you're getting your private sector involved, you're getting the philanthropic community involved. We had people sending us money just on their own. Say, we got to have these pools open. And that kind of stuff. So people want to see action. They want to see leadership. So that's the other word. We talked about trust, we talked about courage, and in the end, you want to run for office, then be a leader. And if you have a deep-seated need to be loved and admired every day, this is not the business for you.
Let me throw in another word.
Work in a pet shop somewhere.
So we've got courage.
Man, that is so
We've got courage, trust, fairness, balance. Let me throw out another word, Senator Simpson, and see how you put this use this in the context of your plan, hope. Not just avoiding a catastrophe, but really painting a picture of what America can look like if a plan like this is implemented, and what it's going to mean, just to the average man or woman sitting at home.
Well, first, just a comment on the mayor. If you're a leader, you're taking flack by the ton. And if you said it beautifully, if you want to be loved, go somewhere else. But learn to... I've had my skin ripped off 100 times, and it grows back double strength. My dad ran for public office. He was a governor and senator. Some guy hollered at him one day, "Simpson, I wouldn't vote for you if you were Jesus Christ." And he said, "If I was Jesus Christ, you wouldn't be in my precinct." And an attack unanswered is an attack believed. And furthermore, you're entitled to be called a fool, boob, idiot, bonehead, but never let them distort who you are. I can see that's the real issue. But I'm an optimist. I believe these guys, they're all talking about what they have to do. I do have hope. And it will come before December 31st, because in a room somewhere, guys like Paul and Chris will sit down and they'll draw on. There's no need to study it any further. And you had all those things, and everything is out there. There is nothing hidden as to what you do. You have to have a blend of revenue, and you can't cut spending your way out of this, you can't tax your way out of it, and you can't grow your way out of it. We didn't have a single economist that said you could have double-digit growth for 20 years and you couldn't grow your way out of this. So you have to have the blend. But if you're in a situation where, like Coburn with a lot of guts, working with Andy Stern, that stereotyping was really something. Is Andy Stern on your group? Isn't he that commie from the union? And then Dr. No, Coburn, I mean, good Lord. Well, those two guys put together our recommendation, what we do with the defense budget. But if you can't get that done, and forget the stereotyping, and that's what's out there now. You say, Dick Durbin signed on to our commission report, and they say, Dick Durbin, God, what? What is this? So it's names now, but that doesn't help. But I can just tell you that I really feel you're going to see people come together, and they're going to drop all the phony stuff. And the phony stuff is, I'm not going to touch Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and defense. Those people are fraud, total fraud. And here's one: every cent of revenue last year, everything, excise, sales, everything the federal government brought in went to only 3 programs: Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and we borrowed everything else, including the wars and Homeland Security and culture and infrastructure and research and development. That's where we are.
So there's the hopeful case. I want to go back, Jay Fishman, to last August and this relatively unprecedented stalemate over the debt limit. Last August, we saw the downgrades of the U.S. fiscal position immediately coming out of that, and it did seem like that was a moment when the world was watching, and where the country was watching Washington and walked away and said, it's just not working at all. What were the, if any, practical effects that you felt in your CEO suite as that was happening?
Yeah, and I'll give you actually a very specific example, but just to the optimism point for a second. I do think that the topic it's recognized. 2-3 years ago, it wasn't. If you consider that progress, raising the focus, raising the visibility, sounding the alarm, and having people hear it, that's real progress. Now the next step is you got to do something about it. But we were banging away. No one was listening a few years ago. So we have a pretty good investment portfolio, size-wise. We have $70 billion round numbers in bonds. And I never believed for a moment that a maturing treasury bill or a bond wouldn't be paid. I never believed it. But boy, we run the place. What if we're wrong? What if we just whiff on one? So in the week before, we actually raised $500 million of cash and I mean initially cash, and we went to 2 banks, which I found very funny. We were worried that the federal government wouldn't pay its obligations, but we were prepared to give the money to 2 banks that had been, well, neither of them had been supported by the U.S. government, but it was a relevant point. But we put $500 million into 2 banks. We did enough cash flow work to know that if, in fact, we were wrong, we could run our business for 30 days on that cash flow.
So you planned for
we did.
A temporary default?
We did. I didn't think it would happen. I couldn't imagine that a maturing bill wouldn't be paid. It's unfathomable to me.
That was the word that Bob Rubin always used to use back in 1993 and 94 when we first faced this, that it was literally unthinkable that we wouldn't hit the debt limit, yet we came far closer than anyone ever believed.
Well, and again, when you really start diving in 2 separate issues, a maturing bond doesn't actually require a higher debt limit. The bond matures and you issue new. So we couldn't imagine that a maturing obligation wouldn't get paid. The fact is they couldn't borrow more. They couldn't, in effect, fuel the engine to spend money. But the politics of the moment were unclear. And I couldn't, it wasn't visible enough to any of us to roll the dice and bet the ranch that we would be right. So yeah, we had enough, in the mattress so that if we were wrong, we could keep the place going.
You're going to have to put money away in the mattress again for next year.
I hope we're going to need a bigger mattress this time.
And Mayor, let me ask you, because you've referred to it a couple of times, could you have done what you did without the requirement that you had to balance your budget?
I would have wanted to. I mean, I believe in fiscal integrity. I believe in the fundamental principles that you cannot spend more than you have, that you have to have a balanced budget. And with or without a balanced budget requirement, which is in our home rule charter, the Financial Oversight Agency, but also we have rating agencies. I mean, when I came into government in 1992 with then Mayor Rendell, the city on its own was facing a fiscal crisis, had nothing to do with anything else going on in the country. But I learned some very tough lessons there. I used to be in the investment banking business. I mean, I paid attention to the finances of the city very closely. And so fiscal integrity and fiscal security are very, very important to me. We have a lot of people watching what goes on in our city. And so the rating agencies also pay attention to those issues, and I'm constantly trying to get our rating up. I think the fact that we have a balanced budget requirement, that we have a fiscal oversight entity, that we have to produce a 5-year plan sets a certain context for people understanding that, you use the word, so it's unfathomable that we won't have a balanced budget. We have to have a 5-year plan approved by a financial oversight agency, and quite honestly, it'd be a major embarrassment not to be able to do those things. So it forces fiscal discipline, but a 5-year plan also forces you to think about every dollar you want to spend, that's $5. Every dollar you save, that's $5. And so it ensures a certain amount of discipline, but also it allows you to plan for the future. Jay is planning for the future. I'm planning for the future. Not sure what the folks down here are doing other than trying to get through the next news cycle. So that kind of discipline really is required. And you have to understand the consequences of your actions. I'm left with the impression, back in Philly and many other mayors, that some of the proposed cuts that come down through these budgets, we're not clear that many members of Congress truly understand the consequences of these cuts, the impact that it will have back at home. And whether it's CDBG or a COPS program or, you can name 100 programs, again, which all have their constituencies, I get that. But there have to be some fundamentals that you agree to. And fiscal integrity has to be one of them. So dealing with this debt crisis, finally, I think, is a paramount issue with the government. I agree with the senator, agree with Jay, that it has to be a balanced approach. It's not one thing. There'll be a number of different things, but you have to have some core principles about what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do them, what are the outcomes that you're expecting, and where are you going. And those are the kinds of things that, unfortunately, many of us don't see and don't hear about at the local level as it relates to the federal government.
And Senator, let me have you wrap this up with applying the Hippocratic Oath to these next 6 months between now and the election. It doesn't look like much is going to get done in Washington until afterwards, but what is the best way, you think, for both parties to do no harm to the ultimate goal between now and November?
I think it's to keep telling the story, and sounds so corny, town meetings, I would find out where they were after me, and then I'd have a town meeting in that place. And I'd speak for 5 minutes and stay for 2 hours. These people won't expose themselves to the public, except in certain other ways, but no, I don't know why that slipped out there like that. Now, wait, where were we? Communication, talking, going back to their... When Erskine and I are on the road, and I'll bet we've talked to 500,000 people the last year and a half, and we speak for 10 minutes each and take questions for an hour and stick around sometimes, and people are saying, how come people don't understand where we are? And you say, because you're listening to people who are more interested in their reelection than their country. And let's just pick, Grover Norquist is one smart cookie, but he's the most powerful man in America right now. How does that sound to you, that Grover Norquist, well, the Americans for Taxpayer Reform, or whatever it is the most powerful man in America because he had 95% of the sitting members of my party pledging never to raise a single penny of tax without a commensurate cut in spending. And so we said, here's one for you, Grover, babe. We're taking the tax expenditures and getting rid of 180 plus of them and taking $100 billion to reduce the debt and the other $1 trillion to give the lower tax base. And what can he do to you? He can't murder you. He can't burn your house down. The only thing he can do to you is defeat you for re-election or put some dud into your primary to take you out. And if that means more to you than your country in extremity, you shouldn't even be in Congress.
And that'll be the last word. Gentlemen, thank you all very much.